Welcome, everybody. I'm just going to give you a short introduction, as some of you may not be members of the Society of Operations Engineers. We support those working in road transport, engineer surveying, plant and environmental engineering, and you can gain professional registration through us with the Engineering Council and the Society for the Environment. We offer free membership to engineering students and apprentices. So if you want to find out more, that's our website there, www.soe.org.uk. Our speaker tonight is Hannah Mason, who's the founder of the English Meeting Room. She's an experienced interview coach, and this session will be of value to you in any interview situation, whether that's for a new job or for professional registration or as part of any workplace assessment you may have coming up. Thank you.
Hi, thank you everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope that by the end of this session, you will feel more confident about your next interview and that you'll have a much better overview of what to expect in an interview. So we're going to cover a few different topics. We'll start with the purpose of an interview. We're going to talk about how to prepare for your interview. We're going to look at different types of questions and how you can answer those. We're going to talk about how to finish your interview, and then we're going to look at some tips for the professional registration interviews. And as Kerry said, at the end, we will have a chance for Q&A as well. So what is the purpose of an interview? Well, it's to hire someone, which seems quite obvious, but a lot of us don't really think about this. The company has a need. They've got a problem. Perhaps they have had someone leave the business and they need to replace them. Perhaps they're expanding. Perhaps they've taken on a new project and they really need somebody to help them. They've got a need and they are hoping that you can meet that need for them. They've perhaps advertised the role. They've received maybe hundreds of CVs. And they've invited you for the interview because they like your CV, they like your experience, they like what you have to offer, and they're hoping that at the end of the process, they can hire you. According to Glassdoor, it costs on average £3,000 and takes 27.5 days to hire someone. And I used to work as a recruiter in Dubai, and I think our largest recruitment fee was about £200,000. So that cost for some companies can be even higher. So, they want you to succeed in that process. They want you to impress them. They want you to give them reasons to hire you, which, as I said, seems obvious, but actually most of us don't go into the interview with that mindset. I find people generally fall into two traps. So the first is you go into the interview thinking that they really don't want to hire you, that it's a test, that the interviewer is the enemy, that they are looking to trick you, to catch you out. And the problem with this approach is you can be quite nervous going into the interview. You might become really focused on giving that perfect answer. You really forget to give them reasons why they should hire you. You forget what you have to offer, which is something because they liked your CV. They think that you've got something to offer them. The second trap is that you're focused on the fact that you really need the job. You go into the interview focused on, what can I get out of this? What am I looking for? And now an interview is definitely a two-way process. It's partly about what the company wants, and it's partly about you deciding if the role is the right fit for you. But if you go into the interview only thinking about what you want to get out of the job and not what you can offer to the company, you're going to really miss an opportunity to give the employer reasons to hire you. So the first step in preparing for any interview is to check your mindset. Think to yourself, am I going into this process just feeling really nervous and like they're not going to like me? Am I going into this only thinking about what I can get out of it and that I need a job? Or am I going into the interview knowing I have something to offer and prepared to give them reasons to hire me? Now, your preparation needs to go a step further than that. So I find one of the things that most people fail in interviews is preparing. And when you're preparing for your interview, you want to focus on two things. So firstly, you really need to know the company. And secondly, you need to know yourself. So how can you do that? Well, let's look at how you can get to know the company better. Most people are going to look at the company website, and absolutely you need to do that as a bare minimum. You need to know who the company is, what they do, but there's a lot more. And I think actually the next slide, if we can go to that, is going to give us some more things that we can do. So you want to study the job description. The job description is full of clues of what the company is looking for. This is where you're going to be able to find out what their need is, what it is that they are really looking for. And you can even make notes on the job description, circle things that you think, yes, I've done that. Yes, I can give examples of that. But also pay attention to what language they're using. You know, are they looking for somebody innovative? Do they talk about being a team player? It gives you lots of clues about what type of person that they are looking for. But you also want to just go a step further and see if you can find out more things about the company that can really demonstrate you've done your research. So you can look at blogs, articles, press releases, sometimes there'll be YouTube videos or podcasts. These can be really great sources of information. And I think as you're looking at these things, make a note of, you know, any good questions that you could ask the company. This is going to really help you seem informed to the employer and that you're really taking the opportunity seriously. I think it's also good to look at the key competitors, understand the market, and understand the industry in general. So, you know, are there any new trends? What's happening in the industry? You know, what kind of things might be important to the company? What might they be moving towards? Understanding the market, understanding the industry can really help you position yourself above other candidates and can help you present even more solutions to that employer. Another great source of information is LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn and you are in the job, looking for a new job, LinkedIn's absolutely an essential place to be. A lot of jobs are advertised there, but it's also a great place to find out a bit more about the company. So I would look at the interviewers. Most of the time you will be given the interviewer's name. So you can look them up at LinkedIn, put a face to the name, see what they look like, have a look at their background, understand what type of person they are, and that will give you clues sometimes to what kinds of questions they're going to ask you. So, you know, if they're an engineer, they're probably going to be asking you technical questions. If they're a HR person, they might be asking you more typical HR questions, like about your notice period and why you left previous roles. But you might also be able to find something in common with them, which could be a great icebreaker as well. And I don't think there's anything wrong with going into the interview and saying, oh, I had a look at your LinkedIn profile and I saw that we studied at the same university, or I saw that we've got a similar interest in this. It can be a really great way to break the ice. And it shows, again, that you've done that research. I think it's also interesting to have a look at LinkedIn and look at the role history. And what I mean by that is if you do a search on LinkedIn, you can have a look at previous people who have previously worked at that company, and you can filter that by job titles. And that can give you a really good indication of how often that role's perhaps turned over. It can give you an indication of whether people are promoted in the company and what types of positions they're promoted into. So this is a good piece of research you can do for yourself to understand a bit more about the company culture. And as I said, as you're doing this research, write down questions about things that you're finding. And it can be great to ask those at the end of the interview. And we'll talk a bit more about that. So that's how you're going to research the company. And it's really important to take the time, do that preparation. But how do you know yourself? And you might think, well, I already know myself. I don't need to spend any time researching that. I know everything there is to know. But it's important to take some time and really consider some key things that you want to talk about in your interview. So think about, what are the main skills and experience that I have that's relevant for this role? And really think about some examples that can help demonstrate this. And especially if these examples are more historic, you might want to just refresh yourself on this information. You may need to look at those projects again, get the details, get the specifics, so that you are prepared to give lots of examples to back up a lot of the statements that you're making. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. It's also important to make sure that you're familiar with your CV. So a lot of us write a CV, send it off for jobs and don't look at it again, and we might forget what's written on it entirely. But the interviewer is going to very likely ask you questions about what you've written on your CV. So take the time to go through it and even consider, what types of questions might someone ask me? So, if you've moved from role to role quite quickly, they might ask you about that. It's good to think through what your answers may be to those types of questions, and just be prepared to answer anything relating to your background, to your CV. My fourth point is, think about, what is your USP? Some of you might be saying, what is a USP? Well, that is a unique selling point. And an interview is essentially a sales process. Now, I know you're engineers, you're not salespeople, and selling something can feel quite unnatural. But in an interview, you are essentially selling yourself, you're pitching yourself. And it's important to think about what your USP is. What makes you different from other candidates? And this might be something you need to reflect on and just think about. Do you have a unique mix of experience? Do you have specific qualifications that are above and beyond what other people might have? These types of things are what might put you above other candidates interviewing for the role. And if you don't know what they are yourself, you're not going to be able to communicate those things to the interviewer. So really think about that. And the fifth thing that I think is really important to prepare about yourself is a sales pitch for the tell me about yourself question. So most interviews start with an opportunity for you to give a summary of yourself. And while I don't think you should rehearse and prepare every answer, this is a really important one just to prepare before the interview. And really what you want is 1 to 2 minutes, which really summarizes to them what you're about. What is your USP? What you don't want to do is give them your whole career history, because they have that on your CV. But think about, if the interview were just to end after that point, what would you want them to know about you? What are the key messages? And write those things down, write down bullet points in terms of, I really want to make sure I communicate these things to the interviewer. And I think this is a question that's just worth practicing, worth rehearsing, just to make sure that you start the interview really strong. So you're going to take a bit of time to prepare for your interview, but it's really, really important. Now, let's have a look at the types of questions that you might be asked. So generally, I find interview questions kind of fall into one of two groups. And you might have an interview that's all of one or all of another, or it might be a combination of both types of questions. So these are kind of general or unstructured questions. Some interviews are quite conversational, and it's just whatever questions come to the interviewer's mind. And the other types of questions are competency-based or more technical questions. And they really require you to give a structured answer. And sometimes these answers even are scored based on what you say. So how should you answer general or unstructured questions? Well, I've got some examples of the types of questions these might be. I don't know if we can just move on to the next slide. There we go. So these are questions like, can you tell us about yourself, which I've touched on. Questions like, why are you interested in the job? Why should we hire you? What are your strengths, weaknesses? What is your working style? Why did you leave your previous roles? What are your longer term career goals? How would colleagues describe you? These questions can be very broad, and sometimes it's actually quite hard to know how you should approach these types of questions. Well, my first tip here is to listen to the question. A lot of people, one of the biggest mistakes a lot of people make is they don't actually answer the question that they've been asked. Especially if you have pre-prepared answers, you might be so eager to give your answer that you want to give that you don't actually answer the question that the person is asking you. So when you're asked a question, the first thing to do is to think to yourself, okay, what is it the person really wants to know here? And if we just move to the next slide, I've got some other points here. So there we go. So the first one, listen to the question, consider what they are looking for. Secondly, be succinct. So I find most people talk for too long. I think it's this natural thing of when we're giving an answer in an interview, we don't feel confident in our answer. So we keep talking and we keep talking and we hope that we've just said enough to cover the point that they're looking for. And the problem is the interviewers, they start to lose interest and they kind of lose focus in the answer that you're giving. So it's better to be succinct. And if you're not sure if you've answered the question, you can always say to them, do you want any more information about that? Or do you want me to, did that answer your question? Another thing here is, I think we've moved on one too many. Could we go back? That's it. It's to remember the company's needs and take every opportunity to explain how you can meet them. So right at the beginning, I said that the company has needs. They want to know that you're the person who can meet those needs. But quite often with these general types of questions, it's hard to demonstrate that. And so you really want to take every opportunity you can to make it about them and to make it about how you can solve their problems. So an example might be, they say, why are you interested in this job? And perhaps it's in the environmental sector and that's something that you're really interested in. You could just say, oh, I really want to work for this company. I think it's a great opportunity for me. I really like the environmental sector and I think I'll learn a lot from you. Well, that's fine, but you haven't said how you're going to help them. So a much better answer would be, I really want to work in the environmental industry, and I love that that's what you're about. I worked on a similar project in my last role, and I actually learned so much about how to consider the environment in engineering projects, and I think I'd love to bring that knowledge into this role. You're still talking about why you're interested in the role, but you're giving them more reasons to hire you and you're making it about them. So, when you're in this more of a conversational interview, you want to take those opportunities to further pitch yourself and what you can bring to the role. And my last point on these types of questions is, if you are going to make a broad statement, if you are going to claim something about yourself, then make sure you back it up with an example. So you might say, I'm an excellent team player. And that may well be true, but if that's it and you just stop there, they've got no real reason to believe you. And I think this is where people also worry that they sound too confident or too arrogant because they're saying all these things about themselves. It's much better if you can make a statement like that, but then give an example. So you might say, I think one of my key strengths is I'm a really good team player. In fact, I find that I'm the person that the team come to most when they've got questions about things. And my boss, even in my last appraisal, said I need to just really make sure I balance my time, because so many of my colleagues come to me, balance my time between helping them and working on my own work. Those kind of stories, those kind of examples, firstly, they give evidence of what you're saying, so they make it more impactful, but they also, those types of stories stick in the person's mind. We are much better at remembering stories than just statements or facts. So, every time you make a statement about yourself, think about, can I give a brief example about this that's going to really further give evidence of the point I'm making. So now let's look at competency-based questions. And quite often, you might even be told that you're having a competency-based interview. And these types of questions are really looking at situations, and they're designed to assess your skills and assess your competencies. So they might be looking at behaviours. You might even get more technical questions here. So examples can be, can you give an example of a situation when you solved a problem in a creative way? Or can you tell me about a time that you made a decision and then changed your mind? And as I mentioned, sometimes the interviewer will even have a grid to score your answers, and they'll be looking for you to say certain things or to show certain competencies in your answer. So these types of questions require a different approach, and there's a well-known framework which you can use to answer these questions, and that is the STAR framework. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. And this is a very, very well-known framework. Some large companies will even tell you that they will be looking for you to answer questions using this framework. So how does this work in practice? Well, for each question where they're asking you for an example, firstly, you need to pick a specific situation. So they are not looking for what you would do if that situation arose. They're not looking for what you usually do. They're looking for a specific situation. So, as you begin your answer, you need to talk about what that specific situation was. So that could just be as simple as, in my last role, I was leading a team of engineers on such and such a project. That's the situation that we're talking about. Now, task refers to the specific task that we're going to be looking at and unpacking in the answer, or sometimes it can be called the challenge. So, I was leading a team. Now, what was the task? Perhaps I was leading a team of maintenance engineers, and a problem arose that we hadn't accounted before, and we weren't sure how to fix it, and it was really time sensitive. That could be what the specific task was. Now, action is where you're going to focus most of your time in answering these questions. And here, what the interviewer is looking for is, what actions did you take as an individual? They're not wanting to know what your team did or what your manager decided to do. It's really about, as an individual, what steps did you take? And you may even want to talk about what options were available to you, what your thought process was. And this is where they're really going to assess what competencies did you display. So I think one of the big traps here is that people start talking about we. We decided to do this and we decided to do that. Well, that's not talking about what you did as an individual. So the other problem here is that people lose track of what the question was. So they might start talking about the situation, start talking about the task, and then they forget what the question was looking for. So, in one of those questions, it was about problem solving in a creative way. So in the action section, I would really want to focus my answer on how I solved the problem and what the creative thing was that I did. And you can even sort of spell back the question to them. So, I needed to find a creative solution. So what I did was this, and that was something we hadn't done before. So this was a really creative approach. Really make it clear to them that the action you took demonstrates the competency that they're looking for. And then R is result. So this is really important. What was the outcome? Did your solution work? Did it solve the problem? Or did you, did you learn something from that? So it's really great to finish on the result, talk about actually what was the outcome from those actions that you took. So how do you finish your interview? We've talked broadly all about the questions, how you're going to prepare, but it's actually really important to think about how you're going to finish your interview, because this is the final impression that you're giving to the employer. This is what they're going to walk away with as their final impression of you. And a lot of people don't take any time to consider this. So firstly, if they ask you, and they probably will, do you have any questions for us? Make sure you ask them some questions. It shows that you're interested in the role. And I already talked about how, as you're doing your research, that can be a really great opportunity to think about what questions to ask. But even in the interview, especially if it's a video interview and they mention something that's interesting, you can make a note. I'm going to ask a question about that. Have a notepad and pen next to you. And, when you're asking questions, think about what types of questions you can ask that's going to impress them. So, you don't want to ask about how many holiday days am I getting, or, do I get an hour's lunch break? But think about questions that you can ask that are going to demonstrate that you are really interested in this role, and that you've got some understanding. Next, you should reinstate your interest. Finish the interview really positively. Say to them, I really enjoyed meeting with you. From what you've told me about this role, it's definitely the type of thing I'm interested in, and I really hope that I could be joining the team. Thirdly, confirm next steps. So, that's simply asking, what are the next steps? When can I expect to hear from you? And that's got two benefits. One, it gives you an idea. So you're not, if you haven't heard back in 3 days, but they told you it's a week, you're not going to be worrying. But also, if they say to you, we will get back to you next week, they're going to feel more obligated to stick to that time scale. And it also gives you an indication of when would be appropriate to follow up with them. And lastly, after the interview, send them a thank you note. And by that, I just mean an email to them. But a lot of people don't do this. It's really, really simple, and it can really leave a good final impression. So it can be quite a brief email, but just, thank you for your time. As I mentioned, I'm really interested in this role, and I look forward to hearing from you. So all of those things will help give a good, lasting impression. So we've talked a lot about general interviews for jobs, and just want to touch now on professional registration interviews, because these do vary a bit. They're not interviewing you to come and work for them. They're interviewing you to assess your professional skills and whether they can give you the accreditation. And one of the main differences with these interviews is you have much more opportunity to prepare. So before your interview, you will be sent a questionnaire, and in that questionnaire, there will be 17 competencies, and you will need to give detailed examples which show when you've met those competencies. And then the interview is an opportunity for them to ask you further about those examples and to really make sure that you are meeting those 17 competencies. So you can be quite confident going into that interview, knowing what the interview is going to be about, what skills and competencies they are looking for, which on the one hand is beneficial because you can be prepared, but on the other hand, if you're not prepared, there's really no excuse for it. So I did have an opportunity to hear from someone who interviews for these roles, and they said the biggest mistake is people just aren't prepared enough. The expectation is they've given you the details of what the interview is going to be about. You really need to take that opportunity to prepare for the interview. And when you send them their questionnaire, they may come back to you with further questions or feedback. It's also really important to pay attention to that. So, just like I said with regular interviews, they really want to hire you. In the professional registration interview, they really want to pass you from this interview. The whole point is they want to get enough information from you that they can say, yes, you meet all of our standards. And so any feedback that's given to you on the questionnaire is given as guidance, for you to say, look, we don't have enough information right now on this point to give you a pass. So it's really important to pay attention to that feedback and make sure you spend further time maybe getting new examples, preparing more evidence on those certain points. And the other thing is you really need to know what the 17 competencies and know all of your examples, know your evidence, be prepared to answer questions about those things. And again, and I said this before, listen to the questions. So as I said, they're looking for details from you. They're looking for you to provide them with all the right information. So if they're asking you a question, you need to answer that question because they want you to give them that information. And if they keep asking you and keep drilling down, it's because you've not told them what they need to hear. So really pay attention to the question, really listen to what they're saying, make sure that you're answering the question that they're asking you. So I hope that's given you lots to think about. I know there's not lots you can say in 30 minutes, but I hope that's given you a really good overview in terms of some key things to be aware of for your next interview, some key things to think about, to prepare. I do have some more resources on my website. So I've got a free guide on there, which is all about video interviews. And that gives you some just tips to consider for if you do have a video interview. I do one-on-one interview coaching as well. So there is some details of that on my website too, which is www.theenglishmeetingroom.com. But for now, I think if we have any questions, we can take a little bit of time to go through those.
I think one question I have for you, if that's okay, please do keep your questions coming in the Q&A, everybody. We will get around to as many of those as we can. I think we've all been in situations where we've been in an interview and we feel it hasn't started very well, and we've got to the midpoint in the interview, and how can you turn it around? How can you make it into a positive experience if you feel you've got off on the wrong foot?
Yeah, that's a horrible situation to be in, isn't it? If you're sat there and thinking, I'm doing terribly in this. I think the first thing is, take a deep breath. You're probably not doing as bad as you think. The reality is most of us aren't great at interviewing. It's something most people struggle with. So, don't give up if at halfway through you're feeling like it's not going well. There's always an opportunity to redeem yourself. As I said, interviewers generally remember the beginning and they really remember the end, which is why I talked about how to finish the interview well. So, you know, a really strong end to the interview can definitely kind of redeem perhaps a poor start if you can leave a really good, strong final impression. So I think if it's not going well, take a deep breath, try not to worry about it, and just focus on performing better through the end. And look, you know, if the whole thing doesn't go well, don't feel too bad. It's all an opportunity to learn. You know, just take it as, okay, well, I've learned perhaps what I need to focus on more next time, perhaps what I need to prepare for more. This was a good experience, a good practice, and then move on to the next.
Okay, we've got a question in from Andy. This is an interesting one. When should you, or should you even mention salary? Should you leave that for the interviewer to bring up, or should you say something?
You know, every process is different. Some roles, salary is going to be advertised at the front, and you might even have a recruiter call you in the first instance and make sure you meet the salary expectations. In some instances, that's handled at the end. I think if you can wait for them to bring it up, I think that's better. You know, you really want to get to the point where you've convinced them all through the interview process that you've got lots to offer to the role, and then negotiate the salary at that point, because you're going to be in a stronger position to do that at the end of the process when they've already decided, yeah, we really want to hire you, than if you bring it up at the beginning. I think also if you bring up the salary early on in the process, it can seem you know, it can be a bit off-putting, I think, sometimes to companies. They might think, oh, you know, you're only interested in that. And while, yes, I mean, most of us do work for the salary, it's really good if you can show that you really love the company, you love the role, and then discuss the salary at a later point.
Okay, that sounds interesting. We've got a question here from Neil. He says the STAR method, that's the STAR method, is what he's used to. I suppose this is more of a comment than a question, but it says he finds it easy to recall if you need to realign back onto a subject if you find yourself waffling. I think that is a good point in itself, you know, if you feel you're talking too much.
Absolutely, I think it's really helpful, and it's one of those things that's kind of widely known in recruitment. So as I said, it's especially useful when you're when you're talking about a specific situation where you're telling a story, because I think that's where, when we start telling a story, that's when we get lost and we go down all sorts of tangents and we start talking about all sorts of details, and then you think, I don't know what the question was anymore. I'm just giving all these details about something I did. So keeping in mind STAR. And one thing actually I forgot to say in the presentation that I meant to say is, I think it can be really helpful to, before the interview, think through what types of competencies are they likely to test me on. And sometimes you'll know because they'll actually tell you. But if you don't know, you can think about it. It might be, you know, if it's a leadership role, they might be wanting to know about your ability to manage a team. You know, they might be wanting to know about your attention to detail, which is probably quite important in a lot of engineering roles. So think through what competencies they might be interested in, and then actually spend some time to think about an example that demonstrates each of those competencies, and then write it out using STAR. So, you know, think, okay, this is a really good example of when I managed a team. What was the situation? What was the task? What was the action? What was the result? And perhaps do that for 10 or so different competencies. And that will just really help kind of get you familiar with framing stories using that framework. And it's also going to give you a kind of a catalogue of examples that you can draw on depending on what questions they ask you. So I think if you've got the time, that's a really useful exercise, just to actually write out each of your examples and kind of under the STAR headings.
This is a question from Dean. I think it follows on nicely from what you just said, actually. He says he's going for an interview which is a bit of a career change for him. So I think that can make you feel you're not so confident about what you've got to offer. So I suppose then perhaps that would help you maybe talk about transferable skills, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, um, especially if they're asking you competency-based questions, um, that's a really great, it's a really great way to show your transferable skills. But I think in any case, if it is a career change, it's really worth thinking through, um, what types of questions might they ask me? What concerns might they have for me moving from this career to that? And kind of think through upfront how you would approach those. And also, this is when kind of knowing yourself is helpful. Think through what are my transferable skills, and get that really clear in your own head so that you can kind of communicate that to the interviewer. So that you're kind of prepared to say, yes, I know I've not got this, but actually I did this, and I think that really transfers well.
We've had a quick one in at the last
Mm.
minute, Andy. Just made it in. Someone's chatting about, you mentioned about you may be called upon to talk through your CV in an interview. So he's saying, is there a knack to, when you're including skills on your CV, is it best to keep it brief? Is it okay to have a slightly longer CV if you've had a diverse background and mixed skills? I think, the question probably, how much detail do you put on the CV in the first place, bearing in mind you will be called on to perhaps to comment on it?
Yeah, I think just in terms of CV length, I find 2 pages is about average. So if you're trying to squeeze it into 1 page, then certainly a longer 2-page CV is fine. The thing to remember is, yes, you might have a diverse and mixed background, but each role has its own kind of specific requirements and specific things it's looking for. So if there are things that you've done that just really aren't relevant, then you just need to ask yourself the question of, is it worth including all this detail? Um, you know, Focus on the skills that are and the experience that's relevant for that role that you're applying for. And that might mean having a few different versions of your CV if you are applying for different types of roles. Um, when a recruiter looks at a CV, the first question they're asking is, does this kind of match the job description? Is this matching the requirements of the role? And so if you've got that information in your CV, but it's just buried amongst lots of other diverse experience, they're perhaps not going to be able to find that information easily. So I think just keep it focused on, this is what the job's looking for, this is what the job description says, and make sure that information is what you feature. And if it's not relevant, then don't be afraid to kind of trim out what's not relevant for the role. And it might be that you need to have a selected accomplishments section that pulls all your relevant experience from different roles up to the top of your CV or something like that.
Yes, so they're making the point, I think, rather than asking a question, that it's perhaps a good idea to tailor your CV for each role you're applying, rather than just sending off the same CV to every job, so that it is targeted. And I think what you've said there about bringing your key skills up to the top, that'd be the bit that you could change to tailor it.
Yeah, if all the roles you're applying for are very much the same, then I wouldn't waste time tailoring it too much. But if you're applying for quite different diverse roles, definitely you want to spend that time making sure each CV is highlighting the relevant experience. And I think the things that I would change are, quite often underneath the person's name, I will include like a headline section. So this might say, mechanical engineer, and it might just give you kind of years of experience and perhaps the key types of things that you work in or key industries you've got experience in. And then you might have a summary section underneath that. So it's really like that top half of your CV. That's where you really want to aim to tailor that to the role, because that's the first thing the recruiter sees. And if right away in that first top half they think, oh yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for, that's just going to make all the difference.
On this slide here, you'll see Hannah's website, which I strongly suggest you go to for some more hints and tips. And our website is there as well if you're interested in finding out more about what the Society does. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been great. And we will see you at our next webinar. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.